almost full attendance. That's very good. All right, today, as promised, we have the Libertarian nominee for the Vice Presidency, Judge Jim Gray, who has graciously come to speak with us during his tour through the South, trying to talk about why the Libertarian Party is an important option to consider when you're casting your vote, as well as to raise some issues about third parties and third-party access to debates, third-party access to the institutions of elections. So, Judge Gray is from Los Angeles area, I believe, served in the Orange County court system, and has been activist in the Libertarian Party for a while, and I'm sure he'll provide you with a lot more information about his views, the views of the Libertarian Party, the views of Gary Johnson as the presidential nominee for this party. So a couple of you are focusing quite intently on Mr. Johnson, Governor Johnson. So without any further ado, Judge Jim Gray.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let me ask you a question. How many of you folks feel that the federal government has all the answers? Thank you. That completes my presentation. Because everything we will talk about really comes from that realization. How many of you, by chance, have read the Constitution of the United States of America along with the Bill of Rights? Good. I swear to you that numbers of my colleagues on the bench around the country could not even raise their hands, because it's amazing some of the opinions I have seen that they could not have read the 9th Amendment, for example, and the 10th Amendment. The 9th and 10th Amendments say, you go back and look at the Constitution itself, which expressly delegates powers to the federal government. And then the 9th and 10th Amendments say, unless powers are expressly delegated to the federal government, they're reserved for whom? The states and for the people, namely us. And so today, the federal government is truly obese. The federal government has usurped, has wrongly taken power from the states, from the people. And so now, what is a libertarian? A libertarian, of course, believes in government. Of course we do. But we believe in smaller government, more localized government. The most local the government can be that will actually be able to address various situations is where the government power should be. So we believe in government, but we believe in more local. We believe in regulations as well, but more streamlined, fewer, more user-friendly. Because when it comes down to it, the individual is the answer. That is what made America great. Be able to have the freedom to fail. You're not promised happiness. I'm sorry. You're not promised happiness under the Constitution. You're promised what? The pursuit of happiness, okay? We believe in equal opportunity for everybody, as much as humanly possible. But you don't guarantee justice. You don't guarantee success. You don't guarantee happiness. So we, as Governor Gary Johnson and I, believe we are in the political mainstream of American political thought today. We are both financially responsible and socially tolerant. We're both financially responsible and socially tolerant. No one will accuse Mr. Obama of being financially responsible. And no one will accuse Mr. Romney of being socially tolerant. We are in that mainstream. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I graduated from UCLA and then went into the Peace Corps. I was in Costa Rica. In fact, I would be the first Peace Corps volunteer to be elected to national office, and I'm proud of that. After the Peace Corps, I came back to law school at USC, University of California, and within a week, this was right at the height of the Vietnam War, 1968, and within a week, I received my 1A classification for the draft, and also a notice for a physical exam. So I knew where my future lay. So I joined the Naval ROTC, actually went through, that enabled me to get through law school, and then I was a military lawyer, Navy JAG officer for about 4 years. After that, I was a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles, prosecuted all kinds of different cases, certainly drug cases, bank robberies, and the rest of that, and ended up by heading a unit prosecuting frauds against the government, against the FHA, VA, so I prosecuted a lot of bank vice presidents, for example, because I believe in responsibility at all levels of society. And in fact, I think righteous prosecutions are those folks that really think about this, work on it, and create some form of a fraud to defraud us out of money or power or whatever else. It's a harder prosecution, and I prosecuted a lot of bank vice presidents to do that. That's what Governor Gary Johnson also believes. We believe in responsibility at all levels of society. After that, I went into private practice for about 5 years, and then as of the end of 1983, a long time ago, I became a trial court judge in Orange County, California, where I was actually a judge for 25 years, and then retired about 2.5 years ago or so. Now I'm in private mediation and arbitration. I did something very unusual for a sitting trial court judge. Back in 1992, a long time ago, 20 plus years, I held a press conference and said that I have watched in my own courtroom us churning low-level drug offenders through the system for no good purpose, ruining people's lives unnecessarily, separating parents from families, rendering people unemployable, etc. Our nation's policy of drug prohibition is not working. And let's put our heads together and come up with some change. In fact, now I've talked about this issue a great deal in the last 20 years, and I usually ask the following question, which I'm now asking you. Forget my background, my experience, whatever insights I might have. Use your own. How many of you believe that we in the United States of America are in better shape today than we were 5 years ago with regard to this critical issue of drug abuse and all the crime and misery that goes with it? Okay, I see no hands, and that's completely consistent with every group that I speak with, and I've done this a lot. I've been on the O'Reilly Factor a couple of times, John Stossel, National Specials, all the rest of that sort of stuff. It's clear. Everybody knows what we're doing isn't working. What is the first conclusion you should draw from that realization? We have no legitimate expectation of being in better shape next year than we're in today, unless we change our approach. Fair enough? So this is what we talk about. And when it really comes down to it, I believe philosophically as well as from a practical standpoint that the government has as much right to control me and what I put into my body as an adult. That's what I put into my mind. It's none of their business. That's what a libertarian believes. Believes in individual liberty and individual responsibility. They are joined together. Let me say it again. The government has as much right to control what I as an adult put into my body as it does what I put into my mind. It's none of their business. But if I drive a motor vehicle under the influence of any of these mind-altering, sometimes addicting drugs, that's a crime. Why? What's the difference? What's the difference? Yes. Yes. Now, by my actions, I'm putting other people's safety at risk, which is a legitimate criminal justice action. So I've been in the criminal justice system, the justice system, pretty much all of my adult life. I'm here to tell you that the government is really good at holding people accountable for their actions. That's what we should be doing. So, if I drive a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol, I hit you over the head with a pool cue, I burglarize your house, your car, those are actions that should be prosecuted, but not what I put into my body. How many of you know who Robert Downey Jr. is? Okay? Pretty successful actor, doing a pretty good job, but he is a heroin addict. He's a heroin-addicted person, will always have that craving, always have that problem. He's doing pretty well now, but he's been in jail before and all the rest of that. He's a heroin addict. It makes as much sense to me to put Robert Downey Jr. in jail for that problem as it would have Betty Ford in jail for her alcohol problem. And as you know, Betty Ford was President Gerald Ford's wife. She was self-acknowledged she was an alcoholic. It makes as much sense to put Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his heroin problem as it would have Betty Ford in jail for her alcohol problem. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's a medical issue. Bring these people closer to medical professionals that can help them instead of rendering them criminals and pushing them farther away. But once again, if Betty Ford, Robert Downey Jr., you or I drive a motor vehicle impaired, we've gone through that. So, I held that press conference in 1992. The reason I'm going through this so much now is that I didn't have any idea who Governor Gary Johnson was. Never heard of him before. But in 1999, as a sitting New Mexico governor, he also held a press conference and said that, well, I've conducted my own audit, as he called it. I have looked around me and seen that the policy of drug prohibition is not working, and we're going to institute some changes. And he did. Now, he had no constituency to do that. He had no political benefit for doing that. In fact, there was a political problem that was attached to it, but it was the right thing. That's what he did. He instituted changes in New Mexico. He caused the police no longer to arrest drug-addicted people and bring them into court. He instead had them go into the medical system, etc. Needle exchange programs and the rest. Very successful. Then I worked with Governor Gary Johnson. Actually, by the time he finished his 2 terms as governor of New Mexico, he was actually a Republican governor, by the way, of New Mexico in a Democratic state. He actually left the state with $1 billion surplus. He started with about $10 or so million in the hole, and he actually ended his 8 years with $1 billion surplus. He actually vetoed more excessive spending bills, something in the order of 750 excessive spending bills from the Democratic legislature, and every other governor combined. And you know, again, he was a Republican governor in a Democratic state with a Democratic legislature. They only overrode his veto twice. So he was responsible to get along with people, and I started learning about Governor Gary Johnson. So when he started running for president, actually as a Republican, and maybe you were following this a year ago or so, he was running for president as a Republican, was not allowed. There were about 9 televised debates among the candidates running for president as Republicans. He was only invited to participate in 2 of them. Why? I couldn't hope to tell you, except I guess they just didn't want him there. They were afraid of him. So he eventually transferred, and as of the beginning of this calendar year, he left the Republican Party and became a libertarian. So he was running for president. I continue to call him the most qualified person to be president that I know of, and maybe I said it a few too many times, so that he asked me to be his running mate. So now what am I supposed to say? So I said, yes, I will do it, but on one condition. And the condition is that we run to win. We're not running to make a good showing, have a moral victory, to look good for the future. None of that stuff. Well, if all that happens, that will be great, but we are running to win. And I'm absolutely convinced that if we've been invited to be a part of the presidential debates, there will be 4 of them. 3 for the president, 1 was last night, as you know, 1 for the vice president. I'm convinced that we would be able to be not only competitive, but probably win the election. Why? Because we have what the people, what the voters of our country crave. And if we would be seen as being viable, they would demand it, and we would be elected. And what is that? Something that the Republicans and Democrats cannot do, but we can. We'll put in a coalition government. What does that mean? It means we blend together forces from all of the parties. We will, of course, in our administration, have libertarians and independents, but also, as long as they agree with our approach of what, remember, our approach, remember, is being financially responsible and socially tolerant. As long as they agree with that, we'll have Republicans and Democrats in our administration as well. And then when we have all of this nonsense, this political bickering, this selfish political stuff, we'll simply have people from our administration go, as Republicans or Democrats. Talk to your colleagues. You know, bring them on board. This is a good idea. Embrace it. We'll give credit to anybody that has a good idea. I don't care what their political affiliation is. Anybody that embraces a good idea will give all the credit in the world. This is what America needs. People are fed up. I think you, to the degree you're looking at this stuff, are fed up with what's going on in Washington. I call it bipolar politics. In fact, the Democrats have a lack of consideration. Actually, it's about 6 months ago, they found a Republican program, a Republican approach, and they actually adopted it. They said, oh, that's a good idea, we adopted it. You know what happened? The Republicans then opposed it. Why? They didn't want the Democrats to get credit. That is simply contrary to the interests of the United States of America. It's going on all the time in Washington today, and we will be able to overcome that. Now, we have ideas. How many of you have seen the presidential debates? Okay. How many of you have seen ads for either Romney or Obama or both? Hundreds of millions of dollars literally being spent by Romney's campaign and Obama's campaign, putting television ads all over the airwaves. Yes? Hundreds of millions of dollars. How many of you have seen an ad in which they talk about their records? They don't. They don't have a record to run on. They don't. By the way, Governor Gary Johnson has more administrative experience as we speak than both Romney and Obama combined. He does have a record. They don't. How many of you have seen any of these ads that talk about their ideas? I haven't. They don't talk about their ideas either because they literally don't have any. What they do is spending hundreds of millions of dollars saying how inept the other one is, right? And we agree with both of them. We do have ideas. And if you want, because I want to talk about what you want to talk about. You know, I am running as Vice President of the United States of America. I am proud. I am excited. In fact, I'll go on and tell you, this is the most exciting thing that's happened to me since the birth of my children. This is something that we do have the answers. We have the most qualified person to be President of the United States that I know of, Governor Gary Johnson. And honestly, with my background, I am more qualified to be Vice President than either Joe Biden, who's actually been Vice President for 3.5 or something years, who has not been out of government since the middle 1970s. You lose touch if you're only in government. And Paul Ryan, who is a young man who has not even had a job outside of government since he graduated from college. You lose touch. Nobody is running there. Of the 6 of us running for president or vice president, not one has been in the military except me. I believe that military experience is important. I'll be the first Peace Corps volunteer. I was a federal prosecutor. I was a judge for 25 years. Pretty much everything that can go wrong in society will come into my courtroom in 25 years. I have seen it, I have worked with it, and I've helped to resolve it. So we have this. So we're looking. And I will answer any questions you want, because we have a libertarian approach to various problems. We talk about the economy, which I will talk to you about. We don't have a whole bunch of time. I want to answer your questions, but I will talk about the economy. If you want, we can talk about jobs, where we have ideas to bring in literally millions of jobs to our country. Education, critically important. We have our schools in many areas that are failing our children, and we have better ideas on how to bring in choice in education. Choice for the parents to decide where and how their children should be educated. They will demand excellence, they will receive excellence. We talk about immigration, we talk about healthcare, we talk about any of these things that you want to. We have the ways of having these things work. All I'm going to do is talk to you about the economy, and then I want to open it up and answer whatever questions up. Professor Broxley was saying that you guys are some of the smartest kids he's ever had in his classes, and that you're going to get the proof. Guaranteed me you're going to have some of the most inspirational, insightful questions, and you're going to nail me. Huh? None of this easygoing stuff. We're playing hardball here. You're really going to nail me. So I'm looking forward to your questions. Let's talk about the economy for a minute. Today, you must know, for every dollar that the federal government is spending, we're borrowing 43 cents or printing money. Think of that. For every dollar today that the federal government is spending, we're borrowing, we're printing 43 cents. No company could possibly do that and stay in existence. No household could possibly do that without going into bankruptcy. And let me tell you the honest truth, which is a country can't either. We are Greece, but we don't have Germany or the European Union to bail us out. This is critically important. The biggest security threat to anybody, to certainly our country, is a bad economy, is a weak, is a failing economy. That takes superseding credit, superseding importance over everything. We've got to get our financial house in order. We have not even had, under the Republicans and Democrats, have not even had a budget for the last 3 years nationally. Haven't even had one. In the last 4 years, we have added, in fact, when Mr. Obama took over, and let me be clear, when Mr. Obama took the reins of government, probably we were in a worse position than any other president coming into office other than Abraham Lincoln. Probably Obama was number 2. We had 2 big wars going on. The economy was in a tailspin. Confidence in the economy was bad. I'm not making any accusations against Obama. It was tough stuff, and to some degree he helped. To a major degree he did not. But when he took over, we had a $10 trillion federal budget. $10 trillion federal budget. Today it's $16 trillion. Okay, so he has added more than half again what the budget was before. It's a colossal calamity. So, what do? Understand, I apologize to you, mortified to say that my generation has really been financially terribly irresponsible. And then as I say, my children are going to have to pay this back, and my grandchildren, which are pretty much your age, are bankrupt. As you sit here right this minute, if you care about your future, you better full well be involved in all of this, because it's your future and the future of our country that literally is at stake. What are we going to do? I tip my cap to Mr. Romney to some degree, because it's the first time that I ever really considered that he was taking the economy seriously when he decided to have Paul Ryan be his running mate. That was the first indication that he really took this seriously, because Paul Ryan was considered to be a budget radical. Okay? Problem is, if you look at Paul Ryan's suggested budget, radical though it may be, it does not balance the budget for 28 years. That is not radical in my standpoint. Governor Gary Johnson, Judge Jim Gray said, we are going to submit a balanced budget to Congress now, in 2013. That means we're going to submit a budget that reduces spending by 43%. I'm not saying we're going to pass it because we obviously can't. That's Congress's view. We're going to have some give and take, and I understand too. It's naive to think it will be passed, but we will certainly go in that direction and start balancing our budget right away. How are we possibly going to do that? Legitimate question, because what you do not do is reduce everybody's budget by 43%, because there actually are some areas of government that are working, some are not. So let's find the programs that are not working, let's find the agencies that are not working. The first thing you do, you understand in any problem area, it's a three-step process to address it. The first step is to recognize you have a problem. I think that we're there now. Don't you agree? I think people are realizing this is a huge problem, so we've accomplished that. Number two is you give honest information. You explain the problem. And how we're going to do that is we're going to, as soon as possible, have an audit of the entire federal government using generally accepted accounting principles. That is required for any public company. Every year they must disclose an audit of their operation using generally accepted accounting principles. It has never happened before for the government of the United States of America. We're going to change that. We're going to give you honest information. That includes the Pentagon. Oh, the Pentagon said, not us, national security. We say, we're not going to give away any national security issues, but we're going to have an audit even of the Pentagon. And where you start, let's talk about the Pentagon. Where you start is, we are today, under the Republicans and Democrats for decades, continue to have our military fighting in military conflicts all around the world. And we say, we're not isolationists. We believe in having a strong military, but we're going to only use our military if our security is being threatened. Today we are fighting in Somalia. How many of you folks believe that Somalia is a security threat to the United States? It's not. We say stop it as part of the 43%. Yemen, how many of you believe that Yemen or the Sudan are security threats to the United States? Same answer. The Afghanistan issue. And honestly, I and Governor Johnson believe that it was an act of war. You all remember this, 9/11, 2001, when they attacked us, literally. And it didn't happen. Afghanistan did not do it, but it came from those that Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, they condoned it, they allowed it to happen, and we had every right to respond to that act of war. By going into Afghanistan, I favored it. We should find those people that were involved with this, root them out, and it should have happened after maybe 60 days, 90 days, maybe 120, and then we should have left. Anything we could possibly do in Afghanistan, we have accomplished. We should leave now. We have spent $1 trillion in Afghanistan. As part of our 43%, we're going to take these troops out now. And by the way, understand, Afghanistan is tribal, okay? They've never had a central government. They've never wanted a central, powerful government. They are tribal. They keep their basically to themselves, kind of like any individual. It's also been complicated because we've also had some drug lords there now. They're raising a whole bunch of opium poppies, which goes into cocaine. They lead the world in providing cocaine to the European Union and to us, so that's a complication as well. These tribes do not get along with each other pretty much at all. They hate each other, but the only thing that rallies them, that unifies them, is when a foreign invader comes in to occupy their land, then they unify, kick out the foreign invader. Guess who that is now? It's time to leave. That's part of the 43%. And then you look at all of our various other agencies and see which ones are working, which are not. What a radical idea. Let's keep what's working and discard that which is not. This audit will help us do that. And I can talk to you about which agencies actually we should simply do away with. But I don't have the time at the moment because I want to answer your questions. The last thing I would like to talk to you about before I do that is we were relying on being on these presidential debates. I think we had every right to be on these presidential debates. We are going to be on the ballot in at least 48 states, plus the District of Columbia. The only one we're sure we will not be on the ballot in is Michigan, and I can explain why or not. But the Republicans have gone around the country and have attacked our ability to be on the ballots. Why? You know, they have done it from, in my way of thinking, a lot of specious reasons, but they're trying to have us use our resources because we're much smaller than they are. We don't have hundreds of millions of dollars. You know, we just don't. So they're making us use our resources for legal fees instead of getting our message out. We've gone in, for example, to Iowa, where we only had to have like 4,000 signatures on petitions to be on the ballot. We had many, many more than that, but they said, oh, they weren't all libertarians that signed it. There's no requirement to do it. As long as they're registered voters, that was enough. We had to defend that successfully. But the only one that's still up in the air is Oklahoma. So we'll probably be on 49, maybe 48, but we'll clearly be on 48. Anybody, any political party, and you've been studying third parties, and good, what a great thing to do. But any third party, I hate the word third party or minor party, but any political party that is on enough ballots in enough states technically to win the presidency, technically to win enough electoral college votes to win the presidency should be a part of the debates. I think that's fair. I think that's appropriate. And if they're foolish, and I think a lot of, for example, the Green Party, they're so idealistic that they're just unrealistic in what they're trying to do. But they should be in the debates. And if they're unrealistic, I have to have every right to show the world that. But the third parties have traditionally contributed to our political experience. How many of you have ever been to Mount Rushmore in South Dakota? Not too many. All of the faces on Mount Rushmore were a part of third parties. It is within our democratic tradition. If you look at George Washington, of course, there weren't political parties back then. Only president in our history, by the way, that will ever be elected unanimously. I don't think that's ever going to happen again. But he did not have a party, so in effect, he was a third party. Thomas Jefferson was in a third party. He was the first Democrat to be elected president. By the way, he's not a Democrat, he's a libertarian through and through. That's what they called him back then. Abraham Lincoln was in a third party. Before that, it was the Whigs. They took over as the first Republican president. They took over as a third party from the Whigs. And then Teddy Roosevelt's the fourth person on there, and he actually ran as a third party. He ran as a bull moose. So they're as perfectly consistent. And otherwise, what happens with third parties or other political parties, if they come up with a good idea, we're going to take votes away from Obama. We're going to take votes away from Romney. Why? Because if you really are not represented by Romney, you really do want to have smaller, less intrusive government. You really want to have financial responsibility. You want to get away from this Obama. By the way, Romney is the architect of Obamacare. I don't believe him whatsoever when he says he's going to orphan his own child. But if Romney does not represent you, even if you're a Republican, a vote for Romney is a wasted vote because you're telling the Republican Party, hey, this candidate is acceptable to me. And instead, if we have these ideas, keeping us out of military conflicts, etc., and we make a really good point, what's going to happen? Traditionally, the Republicans and the Democrats, a week after the election, look back and say, wait a minute, Johnson got all these votes. He stands for getting our troops out of Afghanistan. He stands for financial responsibility and the rest of that. We want those votes, so we're going to change accordingly to woo those votes back from the third party. And we changed and makes democracy work. So that's a hugely important contribution from third parties. And then on occasion, parties do take over, like from the Whigs the Republicans came. So why are we not a part of these presidential debates? And the answer is they have something called the Presidential Debates Commission. And they, in effect, run the debates. And the Presidential Debates Commission is entirely, completely, unanimously made up with Republicans and Democrats. Highly placed Republicans and Democrats are in charge of the Presidential Debates Commission. It got so straightforwardly wrong that it used to be the League of Women Voters that ran it until about the late 1980s. The League of Women Voters officially withdrew from the Presidential Debates Commission with a public statement. We're no longer going to allow our name to be connected to this commission because we do not want to be involved with, quote, the hoodwinking of America, unquote. It got so blatant. But the Presidential Debates Commission made a mistake in 1992, which is the last time that they had a third-party voice in the presidential debates, and that was Ross Perot, 1992. He was at that point polling 7% nationwide. They invited him to participate in the debates, and he did. He caught the excitement of the country by raising different issues, and he ended up with 19% of the vote in the election, and actually he still withdrew from the election for about 3 weeks for reasons I never quite understood. But one way or the other, you can just see what the Republicans and Democrats on this commission did after that happened. Wait a minute, we don't want that ever to happen again. And so they were really smart, brilliant, in fact, by raising the bar at a level no one can reach it. They now have promulgated their regulations. In order to be a part of the presidential debates, you have to be polling at 15% as an average of 5 national polling groups. We weren't even carried in 5 national polling groups, so how could we possibly meet that? We did